Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about a paper that was just published, I think, less than 2 days ago. And it's about some dinosaur bones found in the state of Mississippi. And there's a couple things that intrigued me, a couple figures in that paper that I thought I could relate to some things I talk about on this channel. The dinosaurs we're talking about are going to be ornithomimosaurs. And I'm just going to call them ornithos because I couldn't even say it right the first time. So ornithos. And so let's talk about these new fossils from Mississippi and what they might have to do with, or what they might tell us about the Genesis flood and presidential elections. All right, we got that coming up. Yeah, how was that for a teaser? All right, the Genesis flood, bird-like dinosaurs, and presidential elections, all in the space of hopefully less than 30 minutes. Yeah, let's do it. Ornithos are members of the family Ornithomimosauria, and that name means bird mimic lizards. And I think you can see from the pictures here the reason why they're called that. All right, they have they're theropods, dinosaurs that do have a superficial resemblance to modern day ostriches. Many of them have pretty strong evidence that they had feathers of a variety of different types. Walked on two legs. They had basically longer than normal front arms, or forward legs. Than theropods dinosaurs typically do, like your T-Rex. And many of them were thought to be feathered. And the other interesting thing about ornithos is that many of them have beaks or beak-like jaws without teeth. All right, so some of them had teeth, as we're going to see. The very early ones had teeth, or the ones that are farther down the fossil record, and then later ones lack teeth. And so that's the basics of the ornithos. It's a large group of many identified species from the fossil record. I think the other thing you should know about them is that they're only found in the Cretaceous period. So only found in Cretaceous period rocks. All right, with that really brief introduction, let's go to the paper that I saw that was just released, I think, October 19th. Large body ornithos inhabited Appalachia during the late Cretaceous of North America. So they're looking specifically at one particular location in Mississippi, which is of late Cretaceous rock. And the reason that particular site is considered important is because we don't have an abundant fossil record of dinosaurs in the eastern U.S. And part of the reason for that is we don't have rocks that are exposed at the surface there of the dinosaur age period, right? And so therefore, we don't expect to find those dinosaurs. So there are a few slivers of Cretaceous rock that are found on the East Coast, and one of those happens to be right here in Mississippi. In fact, this little stretch right here, you see, going across Georgia, Alabama, and up into Tennessee is where we see an exposure of Cretaceous rocks. And this is upper Cretaceous rocks, in particular this particular area here in the upper Cretaceous, and we'll look at our geological column in just a moment. And it's in a lake stream cut where they found these particular dinosaur bones of ornithos. All right, now to get an idea of why do we only find Cretaceous rocks in this particular pattern, why do we only see them in this particular area of the country? It's because at the time, all right, if you go back to this particular time period, actually most of the Cretaceous, it's thought reconstructions of that time period suggest that there was a large waterway going up the center of what is now North America, separating eastern and western North America. And right here, what you'll see is, you see this right here? See the boundary right here going up through South Carolina into North Carolina, and then right up here through Mississippi, and then actually coming down here, down the Mississippi River. That'll become important a little bit later. This is where the coastline is thought to have been. And that's based on looking at the sediments that are preserved of this particular age. So we have a whole bunch of of sediment that is found in this region, which is just coastal sediment or a lot of limestone, a lot of shells, dissolved shells. And then this is sandy shore, wetland, marshy areas that are inland here. And so one big question that paleontologists have are, we know a lot about the dinosaurs that live out here. We have a huge number of preserved dinosaur bones, but we don't have as many from this part of the world. And for a good portion of this, there's a lot of erosion going on, not a lot of deposition, except here at the fringes, and we also don't have the exposure. I mean, the Cretaceous rock is all pretty much gone in, say, Ohio, right? We don't have Cretaceous rock. We have older rocks here, and all this is exposed is mostly much older rock than Cretaceous. Anyway, this is the location we're talking about in terms of where these fossils are found is right here. And so there's like an interesting site to be able to identify what did the dinosaurs look like during this time period in this particular location in the eastern U.S. And are the eastern U.S. dinosaurs, ornithos, different than the western North American dinos? I just said United States. There's no United States then. All right, I'm just going to show two figures. All right, two more figures from this particular paper, which is published in Public Library of Science 1, PLOS 1. And the first one shows a distribution of fossil finds from around the world of ornithos, and running from the early Cretaceous into the late Cretaceous. So the late Cretaceous, the Cretaceous ends at 66 million years ago. That's the time, that's the boundary between that and the Paleogene. And the Cretaceous runs all the way down to 145 million years. So almost 100 million years of fossil record in the conventional geological column. And across that, what we find is that ornithos aren't found anywhere else. And so if we direct you over here to the overall geological column, it means all ornithos, of which there's 100 or so species that have been identified from the fossil record, they're only known from the Cretaceous. All right, none from the Jurassic or Triassic, which are also considered part of the dinosaur age, right? Just a reminder that not all dinosaurs are found throughout the entire age of the dinosaurs, but there are groups of dinosaurs that are found exclusively in one or more of those particular portions of the history of the world. And then, of course, none after the Cretaceous. But what caught my eye about this particular figure is that the yellow dots here represent small-bodied ornithos. And by small-bodied, I mean, I think this is 10 kilograms or less or so, down to, say, 3 kilograms. So literally the size of a chicken, all right? So very, very small animals, even at adult stage. And you might wonder, well, how do they know they're adults? Well, in this paper, I'm not going to show you these pictures, but in this paper, they have lots of cross-sections of bones of the dinosaurs they're looking at, which are right here. But I know it's been done for other species down here as well, the very small ones. You take cross sections of their various bones, and you can look at the bone structure. And by looking at bone structure, you can have a pretty good idea whether you're looking at an adult specimen or you're looking at a juvenile, because of the way bones grow at different stages of life. There's teeth and there's other markers too, but bones are kind of an easy one to use. All right, so the colors represent the yellow are small-bodied ornithos, and they, as you can see, are predominantly found down here in the early Cretaceous. And then as you move up through the Cretaceous, the orange ones are mid-sized body ornithos, and then the green ones are much larger ones. And by larger, I mean up to like 1,000 kilograms and more. All right, so fairly large, 6 to 8 foot, so 6 to 8 meter long animals altogether, if you go from snout to tip of tail. And the ones that are in Mississippi here are these right here, which are found in North America. So now the other thing to notice here is that where do we find ornithos? Well, there is one very small one that's been found in Africa, but otherwise they're found in Europe, North America, and in Asia. And all the later ones are found in North America and Asia. And so what we have here is a progression from very, very small-bodied animals, of which there is some evidence on some of those that they had feathers of some sort, and then progressively getting larger in terms of the body size. And then all these are different species. In fact, there's many different genera here. So there's a great diversity of different ornithos over time. But the general pattern is that they're growing larger and larger and larger. And some of the largest ones and some of the later ones in the late Cretaceous have really the best evidence of having more significant plumage, especially on their arms. All of these, remember, would be flightless. There's no suggestion that any of these ever used their feathers on their arms for any form of flight. It's all thought to be for either display or for protection from the elements. So what does this have to do with the Genesis flood? I mean, that was my promo, right? Why when I look at paper like this? I mean, I think it's interesting. I think these are interesting fossils, and I'm always curious about dinosaurs. And this question of how different were dinosaurs in different parts of the world is interesting from a systematic point of view. But just on a really basic level, I just want to tell you that when people tell me, young Earth creationists tell me that, the flood, helps answer all of our questions. The Genesis flood explains the fossil record. There's billions of dead things just laid down, and all these things are sorted out somehow, and the flood can explain it. I am confronted with images like this all the time, in which I see, here we have a bunch of small-bodied ones, and before that, remember, there are no dinosaurs that appear to be related to these in the Triassic, or the Jurassic, the Triassic, the Permian, and so forth. This is a large amount of the fossil record. And remember, all of this pretty much from here on up, well, actually here all the way up to here, young Earth creationists say is all part of a single global flood that all happened at once, and all these different layers of rocks were all laid down almost at the same time. I mean, sequentially, but very rapidly. And sometimes they'll say, well, what we're doing is we're covering up different clusters or communities at a time, and that's why you see kind of a progression of different kinds of organisms in different layers. But what you have here is you have a consistent pattern where in just this little thin section down here at the bottom of the Cretaceous, you have all small-bodied ornithomimosaurs. And then if you go to different places in the world, you'll see larger-bodied ones, and they're different genera and different species. And then if you go to the late Cretaceous, you'll see some of the largest-bodied ones there. There's also small-bodied ones as well, but even the small-bodied ones aren't the same as found earlier. And so this is a consistent pattern across multiple continents. How does a giant global flood that covers the whole Earth lay down different sized-bodied ornithos and as different species in different layers, especially when there's small ones in different layers? Why aren't they all the small ones in one layer? When there's smaller ones above, but they're different species. How does a flood sort out species? And we could further go into, like, there's different species on different continents as well. So you don't have the same species on different continents. And there's different species in Eastern America, or Eastern North America and Western North America as you proceed up farther into the Cretaceous. And the conventional explanation for that is they're separated by a waterway. Right? There's geological evidence from the geological column that there's this waterway splitting North America into two subcontinents. And so those animals being on different subcontinents evolved into different species on those different subcontinents and evolved into larger ones on different subcontinents as well, but they're different species, right? All of that makes some sense, all right, within that context of an ancient Earth and changing climates and habitats over time. None of this type of data really makes any sense within a young Earth creationist mindset, trying to explain all this as sort of one giant flood deposit. I probably should have just gone to this figure. It probably illustrates the idea better. So now what we've done is we've taken, this is the early Cretaceous, and over here is the late Cretaceous. And then, of course, whatever was alive at this point goes extinct. Now, that's within saying that within a historical geology context, right? Organisms are living through these periods. And as they're living through these periods, they start out as these little tiny things, which presumably had ancestors earlier in the Jurassic, but they're different enough that we would recognize them as a different lineage. And so splitting off from some other lineage. And so you have these small, very small chicken-like organisms, which are clearly theropods, right? They have so many characteristics of theropods. They start out with jaws and teeth and hip structure and bone structure and so forth of other theropods. But they happen to have feathers or some kind of downy plumage, and not all of them necessarily had feathers, but there's enough of these that have been found across this entire span of different species on different continents that have evidence that they had some kind of plumage, that it's reasonable to assume that the majority of them probably did. And so they start out small, and then they're growing larger, and then they're larger. And actually, this is a hadrosaur thrown in for a size comparison. But, smaller than an ostrich, but then much, much larger than an ostrich. All fast runners, plant eaters, most likely. There's a variety of different forms of evidence for that. And then the general trend, too, is a loss of teeth as you go on in sort of this forming of these types of beaks. I don't think a lot of people realize that there's a lot of dinosaurs that don't have teeth and have beaks, kind of like modern day birds have. All right, so again, this is a pattern, right, that's observed in the fossil record, and anyone that wants to explain how patterns happen, needs to have it's going to sound silly because they need to have an explanation for it, right? And flood geology really struggles to explain patterns like this in the fossil record. All right, so that's pretty much the lesson from that particular paper, is just yet another example of seeing brand new data and being able to say, oh, I can readily explain that within an old Earth paradigm. But if I was a flood geologist, I would have to come up with a lot of ad hoc hypotheses to sort of squeeze this data in. All right, now, presidential elections. Now, what about this paper made me think about presidential elections? Well, what made me think about presidential elections is you're seeing here a map, a county map of voting, overall majority vote. And I think this is the 2012 election. But this would hold true for really the last 6 to 8 presidential elections. And you see this pattern of blue. Now, I'm sure you see some blue dots, like that's Nashville right there. But what I'm talking about is this pattern right here. Okay. All right, going up into here and actually going down around here as well. All right, and you see this pattern of blue, and it's not associated necessarily with cities. Why would we see this pattern over and over and over again? So let's go back to our map. All right. So this is this just goes to show that geology actually affects our world. Okay. Here's the Upper Cretaceous deposits that are expressed at the surface. And so those deposits are running right here down through Mississippi, through Alabama, up through Georgia, and then through the Carolinas. And what you're not seeing, but I showed before, was this actually comes around here, and there's some in here in the Mississippi Valley. All right, so where does that come from? Oh, let's go back to our map again. All right, we were saying that there are shallow sea deposits, in this area. Okay, right there. And if we look at another map, this is the Cretaceous, all the green colors right here. And the black and dark are actually much older deposits of rock, and the yellows are much, much younger rock. But this rock in the green that's exposed at the surface is limestone, and it's especially good for creates a certain kind of soil at the surface. That soil is very good for growing certain kinds of plants. So, for example, here is cotton production. All right, so this is showing each dot represents 4,000 bales, and so you can see the general trend of where cotton is grown. And you notice the pattern there. You notice the pattern there is quite similar to the pattern of voting, and so it represents where there was large plantations and therefore large number of slaves, and that population is still represented even in today, many generations later. We still have a large black population in those particular counties, and that particular population tends to vote not one particular direction, but more in one direction than another direction, and therefore influences the vote. Anyway, it's just an interesting little side thing about how the geological history of the Earth, all right, results in patterns or expressions of different soil types, which then affect the types of communities and peoples that live in places, and therefore affects, our modern day politics. I'll just toss in one other thing about this paper. And of course, I called these, these particular dinosaurs, the ornithos, are called the bird-like reptiles, right? And it's pretty clear that these are reptilian animals, organisms, much more similar to dinosaurs than they are to birds, but they have some obvious bird-like features too. And as you know, young Earth creationists really struggle with this, like, what is a dinosaur, what is a bird, how do you distinguish the two? Because they want to have those two things to be, they want to segregate those two very clearly. And they don't like this mushy ground of having one or the other. And of course, there are some young Earth creationists who are fully accepting of the fact that some dinosaurs could have feathers, because God can do what he wants if he makes a different group. I mean, after all creationists, I think, place the ornithos as a separate kind, a separate group, separately created. They're not created as T-Rexes, right? They're not created as diplosaurs or those things, right? There's lots of other different dinosaur groups. Each one is separately created for the young Earth creationists. They're all different kinds of organisms, and so who's to say that a kind of organism can't have a mixture of characteristics that are characteristic of other large groups? After all, even the birds aren't all created as the same kind, right? Young Earth creationists believe that ostriches are created separately from eagles. They share a lot of characteristics, and that allows us to kind of group them all together as birds, and there is sort of a general category of birds that's spoken of in the Bible. But why get all in a tizzy about dinosaurs that have feathers? And yet we have answers in Genesis pretty much trying to deny any evidence that something like these ornithos have had feathers. And as soon as someone shows definitively that they have feathers, which really has already been done, but if so, then they just flip over to, well, they're birds, right? As if you have to classify them as birds if they have feathers. That still just leaves me scratching my head why young Earth creationists get so excited and upset about dinosaur or dinosaur-like things having feathers. Anyway, this group of I almost said birds, this group of dinosaur-like birds, or birds that are like dinosaurs. No, can't say that either. They're just what they are, right? They are the characteristics that they have, right? Except for this group also shows a pattern of being very, very small, probably less feathered, and then over time becoming larger bodied organisms with more ornate feathers and probably more complicated feathers over time. That shows an evolutionary progression within the group. Young Earth creationists kind of have to lump all these together and then just say, they were all created with diversity, except that the diversity shows some kind of pattern, which then somehow that pattern is captured by a global flood, which is just covering them all up at the same moment in time. It gets to be a head scratcher how you explain these fossils if you're going to take the evidence for what it is, like the actual physical evidence of the fossils that we see, and you don't want to deny the fossils. How do you explain the evidence of those fossils? I'm just rambling now, so maybe it's time to stop because I'm trying to keep my videos a little bit shorter, and been having trouble doing that. So that's it. I'm stopping. That's it. No grand finale words. Just bye-bye. Talk to you later.